And last but not least, I want to introduce Andre Source from Star Creek Land Stewards. And Andre, if you could introduce yourself, and you'll get to talk lots more. But who are
Sure.
you and where are you?
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all, and I appreciate Dan putting on the course here. Um, my name's Andre Soares. I live in Los Banos, California. That's my home, home where I was born and raised, and lived in Fresno, California for about 7 or 8 years. Still am a registered nurse and was actually worked as a neonatal nurse for 29 years for Valley Children's Hospital in Fresno, and pivoted to this in 2014. So this is Star Creek Land Stewards, which is a targeted grazing company with sheep and goats. And from the start, the primary revenue source and focus has been targeted grazing, although we do breed our sheep. We have sheep and goats, like I mentioned, I have Dorpers. We do breed our sheep. Um, we stopped breeding our goats. I'll get into that in a little bit later for economic reasons, but um, the focus is grazing. I also kind of on a parallel track. My family's been in the commercial sheep business for several generations, and I run also Talbot Sheep Company, which is wool sheep, and we do employ the Talbot Sheep Company herds for some jobs during the grazing season, but really the primary focus of that business is meat and wool. Um, so I think that's a good start. We can get into whatever you want.
All right, so as we go through this, I'm going to stop and ask Andre questions, and I've asked her to interrupt me and add real world information to all this theoretical economic stuff. I will say that my undergraduate degree was in ag economics, and if you put all of the ag economists in the world end to end, we still would not reach a conclusion. So take what I say with a grain of salt. I think the real world stuff is really, really important here in terms of making this pay. So we'll talk a little bit about profit. I think one of the things that sometimes can be hard for us to think about when we're starting a business off is that profit is not a dirty word. Profit is what allows us to keep going, and we'll talk about kind of the definition of profit, and then we'll go through some basic economics and some cash flow budgeting ideas as well. So, what is profit good for? I really like this from Dave Pratt from Ranch Management Consultants, that it's not the reason we're in business, but it's absolutely vital to staying in business, right? We're all doing whatever business that we do because we love to do it and we think it serves a role in our community. It serves a role for the state, but it's without profit, we can't continue, right? And so I want to keep that kind of in everybody's mind as we go through this tonight. Um, when we had our sheep business, commercial sheep business, we did a little bit of all of this, including that last word there. On occasion, we use profit to take vacation. And I think time away from any business is really important as well. But a lot of what we do, particularly as startup businesses, is reinvest that profit into the business just to keep the business growing. Andre, what kinds of things do you think about in terms of profit and how difficult is profit to generate, I guess is one of the questions, particularly in California.
Um, well, for us, Target. So let me give you a little bit about a little bit more background about my business.
Yeah.
My daughter Bianca, who's 30 years old, works full time with me. She started during her college summers, actually high school first summers, doing some project management, and now she's married, and her husband has just recently come on as a manager as well. So. Um, it truly is a family business. I will say also with that, so I'm kind of jumping ahead maybe into some succession planning, but we did some succession planning recently in order for the kids to make the decision, do they really want to come full time into this business? And they decided yes, and we figured out a way to do it as of January of 26. But I will tell you, as sitting in my position, it adds a whole new layer of pressure to making this business profitable.
Yeah.
Before, I was really just trying to support myself. My kids were just about grown. Um, my kids were both, well, high school when I started, and then getting them through college, which seems like that last one got out of college 4 years ago. But it bringing them in now as owners with full consent, it does add a little bit more pressure to the meaning of profitability because this is what they've signed up for. Um, my experience has been that it's been absolutely possible to be profitable in this business in California. Despite a number of challenges that we have that other states don't have, we also have opportunities that other states don't have. Um, California has been on the forefront of targeted grazing, and because of that, we've got government, municipal, and private entities that have learned about this over time. Um, we've got people in governments that have accepted this paradigm and not required a paradigm shift, which can take much longer sometimes. And so there is definitely opportunity in this business for it to be profitable now and in the future, I think, because I see it growing.
Question for you about that. And I think you and I've talked about this in the past. It seems like maybe 10 years ago that we got lots of requests to do demo projects. Prove this concept works. Bring animals here, don't charge us so we can prove that it works. Have we moved past that stage in the business generally in California?
I think those requests are becoming fewer and fewer. Um, Although we are doing one project right now in Joshua Tree down in Lancaster area, that's kind of a proof of concept, mostly because of the species that are being protected there,
Right.
and they want to be sure that no harm is being done. And
Yeah.
so some of that goes on, which I think is great. But for the most part, or a large part, we've moved past it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So just a few quick economic definitions before everybody falls asleep from thinking about economics. But generally, we define economics defines profit as expenses minus income, and if that's a positive number, that's profit. I think all of us know what it is if it's a negative number. We don't like to think about that. But I would ask you all, are all sources of income cash? Are there non-cash sources of income in your business? And I guess, Andre, are there any non-cash sources that you would consider income or increasing your equity in the business that don't come with a check?
That's a good question, Dan. Um, Not that I can think of. Is there something that you're thinking of that I might not be thinking of to be
I
considered?
think the difference in targeted grazing and kind of conventional ranching or farming is that the land asset isn't necessarily appreciating like it would be with a farm or a ranch where you had all your livestock. And that's probably the main source of non-cash income I would think of.
Right,
Um,
right. Yeah, I will tell you this, Star Creek does not own any land.
and I think that's one of the unique things about targeted grazing, isn't it? That
Hmm.
it can be very, very land efficient in that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Are all expenses paid in cash?
Yes.
What about depreciation?
Um, I utilize depreciation when I reinvest into the company.
Okay. Okay.
So I get the
So it
benefit
is
of
a
depreciation, when I
yeah.
buy equipment or replace fencing, um, all of that kind of stuff, I do get the benefit of the depreciation. Yes.
That's a really good point, and that's really what depreciation is, right? It's the way to to reflect the use of an asset.
Hmm.
Um, One of the other ways we can think about profit is whether we increase net worth. So at the end of the year, if your net worth is greater than your beginning of the year net worth, that could be considered profit as well. Um, what are the main assets in your business, Andre? What do you consider the main assets, the
The
most important
livestock,
assets? Okay.
the livestock by far. Hmm.
What are the liabilities?
Um, your ongoing expenses, I guess, just
Yeah.
labor is the primary one. Um, insure, I mean, I can get into this and whenever you want, but labor is a huge chunk of my expenses. And most of the labor I use is that are out the as far as workers that are out with the animals and moving with the herds. Those are H2A herders who are here on contract. And so I have guaranteed them X amount of months when I bring them over. And so I need to carry them and I need to make that time profitable in order to pay their wages.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so I just worked something up here. My worker expense, not including anything I take home or my daughter takes home, no, without any management pay, um, wages are 36% of all of the income that I get from grazing.
Wow.
And that's not counting, that's just their wage. It's not counting payroll taxes on top of that, what it costs to use H2A labor. So if I added that in, I would be probably at around 42, 43% of the
Yeah.
total income I get from grazing in a year's time.
So you have to basically you're just over double revenue what it costs you in labor alone.
Hmm.
Wow. Wow. That's a good benchmark to think about for everybody. I mean, even at the small scale, what what is your time worth and what is labor time worth as well? I'm going to skip through these real quick because I want to get on to this idea of owning a business versus owning a job. Um, how much of your time as the owner and manager do you spend doing sheep work and goat
Oh,
work?
so the way we're structured, uh, 10% would be a lot.
Yeah.
And 10% of a given month would be a lot that I'm actually with livestock anymore.
So you're focused on the business primarily.
Yeah, I'm doing my role is all the administrative stuff. So I need to make sure that, well, first of all, I've got about 22, 23 employees at peak season, which is the summertime. And so a majority, about 15 of those are H2A workers. So managing their contract schedule. And because the cost of that labor has become so high, we have to be very efficient with it. There's not a lot of room for bringing them in early or messing up on a date for them to come and keeping them later. And we have to be very, very finite with their time and country. And so that process takes you have to request them 45 days before you actually get them to arrive. And so managing those schedules um, with all the immigration requirements is very tedious. We don't bring them all in at the same time and send them home at the same time. We kind of feather them in and feather them out to be
Yeah.
efficient. Um, all of the insurance, certificates of insurance for clients, um, all the things that come with that, workman's compensation, payroll. We do all of our payroll in-house. Um, and yeah, and just oversight, I'm the 30,000 foot view person in the operation, right? So I'm looking back a year and ahead a year, trying to see how we're progressing. What are our trends? How are we comparing to last year? What's standing out? What doesn't look quite right? Why are we Why is this expense moving so high this year? Last year at this time it wasn't. Is there a good reason? Is there not? Um, those are the kind of things I end up doing the majority of my time.
And do you have then a manager that kind of oversees the sheep and goat work, the day-to-day, where they need to be when, those types of things?
Yes. So Matthew, Bianca's husband, is the livestock manager. Um, recently had a change of staffing and my longtime foreman departed. And so Matthew is my son-in-law is the livestock manager, and my daughter Bianca is really project manager. So their roles are kind of they're overlapping and both sorting out at the same time right now. Definitely a transition year for us.
Yeah,
Um, but Bianca really has been focused on project management with clients, um, and scheduling of our herds during the season. And then Matthew, who's the livestock manager, is focusing on year-round management of the herds and all that that entails. And then we also have, logistics during the grazing season, which is um, the trucking. Trucking is a freight is a huge expense for us and a big factor in what we do. And so we do some of our own trucking with goosenecks, but the majority of our trucking with goosenecks we hire out. So getting that scheduled, sometimes we're moving herds, 4 days a week. And
yeah.
most of those moves take place 2 hours away from where home is. And so lots of moving parts during the peak season, which is spring, summer into fall.
How many contracts will you typically have going at the same time in June, for example?
Um, I will have probably 10 no, probably probably 7 clients, but 14 herds. So I could have 3 herds on one client,
Right, right. Okay.
different parts. We usually deploy in herds of 400, but depending on their locate, a client may have 12 different parcels that are not contiguous, so
Yeah.
we may have 3 or 4 herds and herders there on one client. So probably 14 herds and 7 different clients at a time.
Okay. Okay. I want to get to kind of how you deal with price shocks like labor or fuel here in just a second too, because I'm
Sure.
sure that keeps you up at night too.
Hmm.
Just a few more ideas here to lay out before we dive into the actual economics. Economic analysis really tells us whether we should do a particular enterprise. And it gives us some tools to think about how we increase profitability, or if it's not looking like it's profitable, what are the weak links in that business? Financial analysis comes after we've decided that it can be profitable, but it gets to things like where are we going to get the money to do this? What's it going to cost us to get the money? When's money coming in? When's it going out? And what do we project the growth or loss of equity in the business to look like? So they're both important, but really I want us to start with this economic analysis to think about are the kinds of things you all are thinking of doing economically feasible, and if they're not at the first blush, what we need to do to make them more economically feasible. So some terminology here. Gross revenue is probably pretty evident. Um, but in a targeted grazing business, um, this is probably substantially different than a conventional livestock business. Most of the revenue is going to come from grazing. And so I think it sets up some other considerations as we get into the expense side of this equation as well. Now, you guys do sell some livestock as well, Andre?
Yes.
Mostly
Yes.
lambs.
Yes. We sell our lambs annually, and then as our weather goats age out, when they're about 7 or so, we do sell our old wethers. And if we sell a chunk of old wethers, we then have been buying replacement wether kids.
Rather
And
than rather than breeding your own goats.
rather than breeding our own goats. And we made that shift. This is our third winter without breeding our goats. And the reason was really about labor. Um, the cost of labor really spiked for H2A labor, any herder living with animals um, really spiked. And because seems to take, um, before it was really 2 years at least before um, a kid goat is valuable on a grazing job. And so take, 2 years of raising that animal before it started paying back with grazing, uh, didn't seem like a good idea anymore. And so, because then it required management at home when the other animals were grazing away, I had to be raising these. And so I've been receiving the kid goats at about 18 months.
And
So
you're
that seems to be working for me right now.
and you're just bringing in weather goats?
And we're just bringing in weather goats at this time. I have retained some does, because we don't know what the future is going to bring for us. Maybe we might want to start breeding again. So I've
Yeah.
retained some does, um, but right now I'm just mainly using wethers.
Okay. So direct costs are the expenses that vary with the number of animals or the number of acres that you're treating. So these are things like um, we go back to that. What would be some things that go up and down just with the number of animals in your business, Andre, or anybody else? What would be an example of a direct cost?
For me, it's my general supply cost. Um, my, of course, any rent. My model is I'm paid for grazing about 7 months out of the year, 6 to 7, and then I pay to have my animals to feed my animals the balance of the year, right? So how much land I secure and rent in the off season obviously um, is a reflection of the number of animals that I have,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
number of herders that I bring in. Um, for me, vehicles is a huge expense, because we have to be so mobile and our herders as independent as possible during the grazing season. I need to have a certain number of them that have driver's license and are driving pickups. I've moved to renting pickups during the grazing season because I don't need to carry that asset on a year-round basis, so I rent
Yeah.
them, and that's worked out well for me. It's allowed me more flexibility to accommodate more flexibility during the very different times of the year for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, that's an interesting transition to this idea of overhead costs, which are expenses that are relatively fixed regardless of how big you are. And it seems like one of your strategies is to take what may be an overhead and try to make it into a direct cost where you can flex up when you need more help or more vehicles and reduce that expense when you don't need them.
Right, right,
So one of the things that we try to look at in terms of comparing businesses is this idea of benchmarks. And if you ever go to a coffee shop when people have weaned their lambs or weaned their calves, the benchmark is never how big the check was, it's how much the lambs weighed, right? We don't compare bank accounts, but we sure compare how big the lambs got. So if we think about these benchmarks, if we take gross revenue and subtract the direct costs, and this idea of an opportunity cost is the idea that every year you can make a decision whether or not you want to stay in the targeted grazing business. But that decision, if you decide to stay in, means that you're not going to take all the money out of that business and invest it somewhere else. So it's just a way to make sure we're comparing this business to other opportunities for using our capital. That number is called the gross margin. And if we subtract the overhead costs from the gross margin, that's what was effectively our loss, profit or loss. So in terms of benchmarks, we want to make sure that of the gross revenue we take in, after we've paid those direct costs, we're keeping somewhere around 70 cents on the dollar. Okay. And then we want to keep our overhead costs at below 50% of the gross revenue. And the simple math there suggests that we should be shooting for a 20% profit in the business. And that's not to say that some years aren't going to be better than others, but it is a way to compare, if we didn't reach that 20% benchmark, what are the factors that resulted in that problem this year and how can we tweak them? Are there some benchmarks that you look at in particular? You talked about the labor as a percent of total revenue. Are there some other things that you look at the end of the year, Andre, in terms of business success?
Um, the things that I look at that I tend to focus on is our freight costs,
Okay.
because I just feel like we always have opportunity to become more efficient with our freight. Um, Meaning, do we use the same gooseneck to make two different moves in two different towns, as opposed to sending one gooseneck to do two, or two goosenecks to do two? Does it matter? Can I do one later in the day? We always like to live in the morning, but does it matter? Those kinds of things, just trying to become
Yeah.
much efficient with freight. And then, of course, that all goes away real quick when you have fuel costs that just
Right.
came upon us. So I was really looking forward to 2026 being a good year for me to really kind of figure out, how well we're doing. And that is gone now. That opportunity is shot. Um, as far as freight and fuel. Um, but so that's a big number for me. Um, Wages, I think last year we figured out a way to be almost as efficient as we can be with wages. Um, Insurance, big one for me that I feel I can manage. I have opportunity to manage down is workers' comp. That's a huge number. But with safety training and reducing your use, you have really an opportunity to impact your modification rate. And that I've seen that's helped a lot over the years. So, it could go away pretty quickly with one bad accident, but
Right.
I really feel like investing time and money in safety training, um, taking the time to remind everybody, go slow, this isn't an emergency, take your time, don't take a risk here. It's paid off for us thus far, knock on something. But a lot of the other insurance that we carry, can't really manage down. The rates tend to be what the rates are. So the one thing I've been able to do there, which I already spoke to, is renting vehicles instead of buying them. So I don't leave those vehicles. I don't own those vehicles and have to insure them on a year-round basis either.
And they're not sitting for the time of year that you're not needing them,
Right.
still costing. Yeah. What, how do you, I guess one of the mental aspects of owning a business like this is figuring out what you can control and figuring out how to live with the stuff you can't. And I'm thinking in particular of wages here, since the state sets the wage and there's really no way around that. How do you navigate those kinds of things?
Um, so like I mentioned, in the past 5 years or so, we've had huge increases in wages. And one of the approaches I took was just being very uh, upfront and proactive in communicating with my clients and letting them know. And I mean, I engage them to help politically, even early on. And anyway, uh, but they understand, my clients understand why my rates went up.
Yeah.
Uh, and we were able to, I mean, we had one agency even stop their contract time early because they were aware that there was going to be potentially a big wage change, and they wanted contractors to be able to bid on a known cost versus a surprise that came in after the contract had started. So, so just being upfront with them and being able to move some of that cost to the client. I feel like I have been able to move just about all of that cost to the client. The market has borne that. Um,
Yeah.
what I don't think the market will bear this year, it's just too late for me. For most of my clients that I've already quoted, is the increase in freight that I will
Yeah.
realize because of the fuel.
Yeah. 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 There's a that I imagine there's a line after which you're already committed on a bunch of jobs. You can't really change those terms.
Yeah, I don't like to. If I
Yeah.
don't if I think I can get through it, I don't like to change that. So, so
Yeah.
we had during COVID when fuel prices spiked for the first time in the big spikes, um, my carriers uh, put on an 18% fuel charge that never went away, and now it's at 28. So,
Wow.
yeah, it'll hurt this
Wow.
year. I'm
That's
hoping
ouch.
changes at least in the middle of the summer, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. All right. We talked about these things. I want to get to this fun part where we're all going to go in the grazing business together. All right. So fortunately, we've got somebody with experience like Andre to coach us through this, but we're going to go into this with a few assumptions. Um, we have no money, so we're starting out just like most sheep operations with no money. We have no time because we all have jobs in town, right? And we have no contracts and no land base. So it sounds like a great opportunity to me. It sounds actually kind of like I started my sheep business 20 years ago. So that means we're going to need to do some things to make this work. We're going to have to borrow money, right? And most times you can't borrow money for free. I've not found any banks that are giving it away. We're going to have to find contracts and land to graze on. We're going to have somebody to take care of the livestock, right? We're going to have livestock to begin with. Without any mouths, we're not going to get any grazing contracts. So those are what we would call, from an economic standpoint, fixed or overhead costs. The cost of money, the cost of land, and the cost of labor. And I think Andres described how they are able to flex up in high labor times and flex back down. And I think that's one of the advantages that a targeted grazing business has over a conventional livestock business, is that you can't flex like that as easily. But we do incur some of those costs regardless of how many acres we graze. So if you think about dollars on the left there and a number of acres grazed, no matter how many acres we graze, we're going to have expense just for running a business, insurance and things like that. It's just a cost of doing business, whether you have any income or not. Okay. Now we've purchased livestock and we got them out on projects. Are there other expenses besides that management labor and the cost of land that we rent? Might be supplemental feed, right? Minerals and things like that. We probably are going to have some veterinary costs. We may put ear tags in or do other livestock ID. There may be some marketing costs and some interest on buying those animals. We're going to have transportation that's going to go up and down depending on how many acres we graze. And so we call those variable or direct costs. And that expense line means as the acres grazed increases, our expenses go up as well because we need more animals and we're going to more acres. How's everybody feeling about our business right now? Everybody excited about this? All right. So we just got paid for our first acre of grazing. That blue line is revenue. What do we call it when the revenue line is below the expense line? What's that called? It's a big economic term.
Loss.
Loss. Do we like loss? Loss sucks. So we got to graze more acres. What is that place where the blue line crosses the green line? What's that called? Where our revenue equals our total expenses.
Break even.
Yeah. How about break even? Do we like break even? Do you shoot for break even, Andre?
I do
Or
not shoot for break even.
do you set a goal every year for what your ideal profit level will be? Is that part of your planning process?
Um, my actually, I have to be honest, my goal every year is really my grazing revenue goal.
Okay. Okay. Because you can
Um,
control the other things to some degree.
because I think I figured out how to control the others well and the others well enough. But
Yeah.
my the number I follow is my revenue goal,
Okay. Okay.
grazing revenue goal.
Okay. So you don't account for any livestock sales in that goal because that's almost a byproduct of the grazing business.
Correct. I assume there is some, but that number is, I think this is just me, the nature of Andre is that that's not a number I have any control over, it feels like.
Yeah. Right. Right.
You know, the
Right.
market's so volatile. Uh, it's just the number I have more control over is the grazing revenue number because I have the ability to go and get awarded contracts, right? So
Right.
that's where I feel like I can put the work in. Um, and ideally, get more business. And seems like the rest can, I mean, doesn't all take care of itself, but I can manage the rest.
Along those lines, how do you go into a potential contract and think about what it's going to cost? How do you work out that bid process in your operation?
So we take things into consideration like freight. I keep saying that, I know, but uh, how many trips is it going to take? How many truck trips is it going to take for me to get animals in there and out of there? And am I going to have to send trucks to move them in between time? Um, how much time do I think it's going to take my herd to move through that vegetation?
Okay.
Uh, so I never do anything without a site visit. And even that isn't always helpful because usually I'm there, for any public agencies, typically I'm looking at that ground. If it's my first year, I'm usually looking at it 4 months in advance of grazing it. So, um, that is just a factor of experience, I think. Uh, Figuring out your best guess, and that's all it is a best guess at how long is animal it's going to take those animals to get through that vegetation, starting on the day they happen to hit the ground and then to ending the day they happen to be done. So um, we factor time, number of days on the ground there. Um,
Okay.
we always we always make the assumption we're sending one herder with one bunch, and like I mentioned earlier, our bunches during the season are about 400 head, so I have to
Okay.
factor that in. And I can kind of build those costs annually.
Yeah. Yeah. That this is kind of a one-off on that, but I go back to the project that you guys did up here in the foothills a while back. And one of the challenges with that project was it seemed like the parameters of the project changed almost on a daily basis. How do
Mhm.
you cope with a project like that where your client is still trying to figure it out, and you're having to adjust on the fly?
Um, Communication, communication, communication. I want to make the
Yeah,
client on the ground happy. Uh, the first step in getting that done, though, is managing expectations on the front end. And sometimes you can do a lot of work on the front end to manage expectations, but you still have changes once you're on the ground. We really want to make that client happy, and so we will do our very best to make that happen and adapt while we're there, uh, within reason. But then we're keeping in mind, I have a number of clients scheduled for this same herd
right.
to be done. And so scheduling is a huge factor. Bianca does a fantastic job of it. Um, Estimating the number of days each herd is going to be on the project. The goal is, and we've are pretty good at it is that once a herd leaves Los Banos in the spring, um, that herd keeps moving from project to project and doesn't come home for one down day. So keeping those clients uh, in the loop constantly about our ETA is critical. So it is a lot of time communicating with clients. If we have if we have any significant change, we're having to call the next three clients and change their ETA. And so it's a fluid process. The good thing about that is you end up building really good relationships with your clients that way. That just because you're doing more communicating with them, and that always pays off.
Allison had a question that's kind of related to the logistics piece of that. Do you always try to fill a truck when you're moving animals? And how do you consider that when negotiating a contract? You always try to go with that 400 head
Yes.
unit on the contract?
Yes. 425, depending on the size of the animals, but that fills about that's about four gooseneck loads.
Okay.
So double
Okay.
decker gooseneck loads.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons we use that number.
Okay. Okay.
We do some semi loads. We'll do a semi load anytime we can. The reality is our locations don't allow for semis in and out for the most part.
I was going to ask, do you factor that into a bid if it's easier to get in and out? Is that an easier project to do? Can you bid that lower than a hard project, I guess?
Um, I tend to, if I can, I bid transportation separately. That
Okay.
works out for me about 50% of the time.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, depending on the distance though, sometimes
Right.
I can, the distance matters, the vehicle matters. It's just all of that. I have to factor all of that in.
It's like putting this huge puzzle together, it sounds
And
like.
I'm not right all the time,
Yeah, right.
so we just do our best. And that's why I feel like, we have opportunity for some freight efficiencies, but um, things change all the time. But
Yeah.
we just do our very best to be as efficient as possible. Like this year, for example, last year we had a new site. And because it was a new site and because of the timing that we were given to complete the job, we went with, I think 600, we went with 600 animals. Well, the job was taking longer. We realized, we should come, let's send some more. And it was early on in the season, so we were just getting our animals out. So we sent a few more. And then we sent a few more because it was taking longer. Well, now we know this year, don't mess around with that. We went with, two semis, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
dumped them on the first day. That happened to be a job where we started with 1,200 head, but we could do that because we're just on the start for a couple reasons. We're just getting herds out. So this is the first job for three herds. They had nowhere else to be yet. And the property we were going to could handle 1,200 head.
Yeah.
So it's closer to the Bay Area. It works for us. So I can get them halfway there, get this job done, and when this job is done, I'll deploy three herds of 400, and that freight will be less.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
Here's
And
another
that's kind of
question. Do you contract livestock? I do some internal with my own drivers. Majority is I contract out with local guys, local Los Banos people.
good question. So I want to talk a little bit about, this is kind of the basic graphic depiction of a business, but what are the things that this can tell us about how we can increase profit? So one of the ways we can do it is to reduce overhead, reduce labor costs, reduce the cost of the vehicles. So at that same number of acres grazed, if we reduce overhead, um, we can be profitable. The second thing that we can do is charge more per acre while retaining the same amount that's not always an easy thing, I don't imagine. That you got to think pretty carefully about price increases. Has that been your experience, Andre?
Yes. And you know, I have increased prices over the last several years, and it's been really only a reflection of the labor increase. I haven't
Okay.
really passed on the fuel. Um, so anyway, yeah, it's really been a reflection of the labor because I
And
didn't feel like I could add any more in there.
right, right. And have clients been reasonably receptive to
Yes,
that when they know the
yes,
reason?
but we're approaching the tipping point, you know?
Right, right.
Mhm.
It's like when I sold lamb at the farmer's market, that there was a point past which people would not pay a premium, no
Mhm.
matter how great the lamb was. I think that's true in this business too.
Mhm.
And then the last thing is just to figure out how to graze more acres, but that comes with costs too, right? That means more animals and more labor and more infrastructure and all those types of things.
More
Um,
mouths to feed in the off season. Yeah.
right, right, right. So your decision to keep breeding the Dorper sheep but not breed the does, is that a reflection of the labor in lambing versus the labor in kidding?
Yeah, labor in kidding as well as the time it takes to get
Right,
get those kids to grazing stage. So I
right.
would need to retain those kids at home a full year and a half. And then
Whereas
I
the
need
lambs
labor at home to care for them.
and the lambs can go
The ewe lamb, yeah,
as
any lambs that I keep that I retain, ewe lambs that I keep, I'm able to manage them. Um, either it's just I either can blend them in with a ewe herd, or I can manage them um, more locally and at less of a cost.
okay, okay. Question from Katie. What are some of the metrics you use to determine price for each project? And are you charging per acre or per animal day typically?
Typically per acre, although um, I bet I have, well, I have one area of California where we started grazing, and it, because of the way the program grew there, it turned into a rate per day. And the
Okay.
reason was our herd was grazing, and a neighbor said, a neighbor business saw it and, hey, we'd like, can your goats come over here? And it kind of grew kind of quickly. And so uh, the logistics weren't always the same. So we just turned it into, it was easier to bid at a rate per day and build that whole program. That happens to be a program where we have multiple different clients that are um, con- often contiguous, mostly contiguous actually. But so the animals never leave the ground and may go through 14 different clients.
Okay.
And so because of the way that program grew to be what it is today, we a rate per day seemed to be easier, and the communities accepted it, and that just is what it is. But the rest of the work I do is mostly acres per day. One client does want like per head bid.
Okay. Okay. So one of the things that Andre talked about, and I'll kind of use when we had sheep, our schedule versus what Andres talked about. And so in our little sheep business, we lambed in February because we were trying to hit the grass coming on fast. But my focus was on lamb and wool in the foothills where it was colder and I didn't have alfalfa available. But that meant we sheared in April. We vaccinated the ewes in January. We were weaning off of grass in June. And that gave me kind of two windows where I had dry ewes available to go out and do jobs. So I could do stuff in July and August for fuel load reduction, and then I could come in and graze vineyards or crop residue in the late fall, early winter. So a pretty limited window because of my focus when I could get paid to graze. And I think, Andre, this is probably somewhat similar to your. I'm just going to go through them all again. So you lamb you lamb in October, November, is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay. And is that a function of wanting to have animals available for contracts, or is it also a function of having alfalfa to be on at that time of year?
It just so happens those two things happen at the same time. So yes,
Coincide.
both of those
Yeah.
factors. Yes,
Yeah. Okay. And then, so you guys are doing stuff early. Do you guys shear in March, typically early March?
correct. Correct.
But not the Dorpers that's just the wool sheep.
Wool sheep, yes.
Okay. And then you're weaning in March as well.
Correct.
And I think you've told me this, but when do you start on projects? Maybe early March?
We start on this year we started projects as soon as we were done uh shearing, we weaned. So yeah, mid-March
Okay. And you'll
this
graze
year. This
through,
year we did.
and
And we
they'll
will
be on
graze
projects till September.
through uh we can go as long as October 31st.
Okay. But you always come home to lamb. You don't lamb out
Always
on
come home to
draws.
lamb.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay.
And October 31st, again, that's because I don't want to confuse people. My the sheep will be home lambing by then, but my goats could stay out till the end of October
Oh, right. 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 That makes sense.
because they're not. That remember, my goats are not breeding, so that's what gives me the flexibility to graze later if I need to.
Let's see. Do you keep like seasonal records, how fast you're going through projects, those types of things, so you've got something to look back at?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Looking
Okay.
back and finding out how long did it take us the previous year. Yes.
And do you adjust that based on like this year's an early year? So is stuff going to go faster or stuff going to go slower? How do you kind of gauge that?
Uh, we don't, to be honest with you. Because where we graze, there's different little climate systems where we're
Yeah,
going.
right.
We're in Marin County, that's its own little world. We're in the Bay Area, that's its own little world. We're in the coast, that's its own little world. So we just
The animals
basically
tell you
used it.
when you're done.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The animals tell us when we're done. Yeah, and if
Mhm.
I look back past 3 years or so, if it's all very, very tight.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
variance is very tight
Okay.
as far as if I compare a project to project with the same number of animals.
How do you think about scale? How big do you think you need to be to make this all work?
Hmm. Well, I'll tell you, in 2014, I started with 2,500 animals, I believe, and we grew and grew and grew every year, basically reinvested every year. And we now have about 7,500. And that's a good number. It's a big number. We've been about 7,500 for the past 3 or 4 years. Uh, the limiting factor here is there's twofold. One is I don't know how much more manageable the grazing season would be if I had even another herd of 400. It's just a lot of moving parts.
Yeah,
um, a lot of stuff to manage. And then uh, the second thing is, I've got to be able to feed those mouths all year round. So
right.
those are the two limiting factors really for me as far as growing.
Okay. Okay.
Because if you have, I mean, like I mentioned in the beginning, I believe you can be profitable doing that, doing in this business, but you've got to be able to manage it on a year-round basis.
Of the businesses you have seen not succeed, what were the mistakes that they made in your mind? Have you seen businesses that aren't here anymore, and what would you say you've learned from that?
It's hard to say because I don't know the inner workings, but
Right, right.
um, I know this. This is a service-oriented business. It's quite different than a commercial operation. We are providing a service. And so you have to keep that in the forefront of your mind with every communication from the outset. If you go onto a job with the mindset that this is your ground for 2 weeks, it's not. It's not, you're not going to have a good long-term relationship, in my opinion. You've been invited onto this property to provide a service. That's why the money is exchanged in that direction. And so you have to have that demeanor throughout. I think that's, I've seen some businesses struggle with that because
Yeah,
you're going into working with somebody who's hired you on. You're, we always think of it, our job is to make that person's job easier.
right,
So I don't want to
right,
come onto your property or your entity's, your agency's property and be a problem for you.
right,
That's why you've got to put in the time in advance, make a plan, make sure that you're managing their expectations so that they aren't caught off guard. And then they're concerned about getting in trouble in their job,
right.
so it's a service oriented business. I think that's probably the biggest difference that you have to take away.
That's a really good point. And I think that, we talk a little bit sometimes when we get together as an industry about competition, but it seems like the bigger competition are the other types of vegetation management services that are out there, whether it's mechanical treatment or those other things that people could do besides bringing sheep and goats in that
Mhm.
is part of what we have to keep in mind. It's a
Right.
really good point. Um, so how do you deal with cash flow? Money coming in the summer, money going out all year round. How do you kind of manage that?
Um, don't spend your profits if you can't afford them. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
you know. I will tell you there are years where I experience a profit, but I experience a profit on paper, but it never goes anywhere because I am then financing the first 6 months of the business
right, right.
with that profit. Um, so it's a matter of how you want to do. I do have an operating loan that I have access to, and I maintain that, and I used it certainly in the beginning years, but I haven't used it in a while now because I don't want to pay them interest, and so I've been funding it myself for the first few months of the year until I start turning a profit. I don't start getting the money. The money return doesn't really show back up until about June.
Okay.
Even though I sell lambs earlier in the season, my I'll tell you my of my total income. If I add my grazing income and my livestock sales income, um, my grazing income is 80% of the total.
Okay.
Livestock sales is 20% of it. 20% gets eaten up on a big workman's comp bill or
Yeah.
just wages as my herders start to come in before I can bill for services. It gets eaten up very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good number. That's really helpful. All right. I'm going to stop sharing, and we are at about it's 10 after 7. Let's open it up to questions. Do you all have questions for Andre about the whole business aspect of this?
Can you
You
hear me
guys are
now?
not. Yep. Yep.
Andre, who does your grazing contracts? Do you do all your own contracts?
I do most of all the bids. Is that what you're asking?
Your contracts that are created with your clients. Do you
So most of the
create those?
contracts, I have a contract, a basic memorandum of agreement that I send to a client, mostly the private clients. Public agencies, they usually have a very standard form that they're required to use that comes to me.
Okay. And have you had any legal problems during your operation?
Not with the contracting. I'll tell you what my biggest legal problem has been, and it's been 2 or 3 occasions, dog human interactions in public spaces.
Okay. And have you had any like lawsuits or anything regarding
No
that? Or
lawsuits. My attorney has, so first of all, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get insurance for dog bites. That protects you from if your dog bites anybody. And I have not been sued, but I've been threatened. And my attorney has advised me, he said, my experience with a dog bite, pay what they want. Pay their
Great.
expenses. And some are easy, some are horrible. But there is no
So-
insurance coverage.
Oh, there is not. Okay.
Not for a
So,
business. Yep.
Not even
Okay.
very difficult for home.
Yeah.
If
Right.
if you've got a dog of any size as a pet, you're not covered by your homeowner's insurance, anything if they bite
True.
anybody.
True.
do you keep an attorney on retainer?
Not on retainer. I have a business attorney that I work with if things come up and does all of my business stuff, like on an annual basis or succession planning stuff. And yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Got
Laura?
one.
Yeah.
This has been amazing. I wish I had this class about 6 months ago. What about taxes? You have any insight, anything you wish you had known when it comes to taxes, deductibles, anything in that kind of economic area?
I will tell you that I would say I don't have any great advice except that, as I was growing my business, my choice was to reinvest profit. And so we bought equipment, we have to provide housing for all of our herders. So, buy new camp trailers for them, not brand new. I rarely will buy anything brand new, but, buy a new camp trailer for a herder, just constantly reinvesting into the business. Another thing and then that creates your depreciation. That investment comes right off of your gross income, taxable gross income. And so those kinds of things, definitely, I have done that. I was just thought of something I was going to say. It'll come back to me. Sorry. Mostly just, if you don't need the cash, my choice, like I said, had been reinvest into the business. So whether it was animals or sorters or fencing or for a while we were, it was a little shift when I decided to start renting pickups. And I'll tell you, that's one of the best decisions I ever did, I ever made.
I tell you what, that one little piece of advice, my husband and I just looked at each other and were like, oh my God, what a great idea. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, another thing about that is when you rent, I'm renting vehicles that are newer than I could afford to buy. And the maintenance alone, the downtime, during the grazing season, if I have a pickup down a day, it's costing me twice as much as the repair bill because I've got to backfill. So just no down days. You have to keep things rolling. And so that's been a big help.
Andre, there's a question in the chat from Ashley. How do you handle grant contracts that require liability when it comes to dog bites?
I've never had one. I would ask the grant writers to show proof of where you can buy it.
And I think most of the grant funded the grant goes to the entity that's hiring you. It may require an umbrella liability policy. It does not specify what has to be in the liability policy, in my experience. So it doesn't
Yeah,
say
the
dog
policies,
bites.
the contracts often require $200,000 or $300,000 of coverage, liability coverage, to carry that. But even within there, it's difficult. It's
Yeah.
difficult to, I mean, I've not been able to find any that will cover for a dog bite.
And we did some work, actually, we did some work together with PG&E years back, and I think they required like a $2 million liability policy, but it just required me to show proof of insurance. It didn't require me to share the terms of the insurance.
Uh-huh.
Another question in the chat. Do you find public agencies or private landowners to be more profitable? Which do you prefer working with and why?
Uh, hmm. I found them to be equally profitable, the mix that I have, I would say. What I like about the public agencies is I'm more likely to get multi-year contracts. Multi-year contracts are very, very key. You can plan everything from labor to livestock. You can start actually building a budget if you know you've got you can build next year's budget. At least you've got that revenue to plug in, you know.
Yeah,
Um, so that's the key thing about the public agencies is you're more apt to get multi-year
yeah.
contracts.
You
And
don't
they
have to
tend to be
answer.
larger, and so there's less work. You get more bang for your buck
Right,
as far as
right.
planning. You get one public contract, usually a lot more acreage than one private.
You don't have to answer this question, but do you ever have a pain in the ass surcharge for a client? And have you ever fired a client?
Um, I don't have, I want, we talk often internally about a pain in the ass charge. I will be honest about this. One of the most difficult type of client is homeowners associations. And the reason is there's a million chefs in the kitchen and it's very difficult. So now we've come to that. That's been one client we didn't fire. We just said, I'm sorry, we're not going to provide a bid next year.
Yeah,
But you know, we've come to the point where we say up front, if we get the job and we put it in our proposal, we will have a single point of contact. We will answer to
yeah,
one person. The end.
yeah, yeah. That has definitely been my experience too.
Yeah.
I really want to thank Andre for giving up a Tuesday night and sharing so much experience and knowledge. Really, really helpful. So thank you. Thank you very, very
You're
much.
very, very welcome. It's nice visiting with everybody.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you all.
Okay. Bye,
Thank you
Dan,
all.
Morgan. I'll see you guys Saturday.
Great.
good.
Thanks, Andre.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.